This week, we welcome Jeff Costlow, Deputy CISO at ExtraHop, to discuss how to protect your assets according to their value. In the Leadership and Communications section, Real Leaders, Abraham Lincoln and the Power of Emotional Discipline. Social distancing, 15 ideas for how to stay sane. Rethink your relationship with your vendors, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Cybersecurity isn't only about stopping the threats you see, it's about stopping the ones you can't see. That's why Microsoft Security employs over 3,500 cybercrime experts and uses AI to help anticipate, identify, and eliminate threats. So you can focus on growing your business, and Microsoft Security can focus on protecting it. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Microsoft Security.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 167, recorded March 23rd, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, from an undisclosed location, and no, I'm not in a bunker. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island is one of my co-hosts, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Hey, how's it going, Matt?
Very, very good. And joining us remotely, because he's got to hold down the fort, is our other co-host, Jason Albuquerque. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Good. We missed you last week, buddy. I know it was kind of crazy, but hopefully it looks like things have settled down.
Friend.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get some new sense of normalcy here soon.
Yeah, let's hope so. Speaking of normalcy, InfoSec World 2020, which was originally scheduled for March 30th to April 1st at the Disney Contemporary Resort, has been rescheduled. Conference is now June 22nd to 24th. It will be at the Coronado Springs Resort. Security Weekly listeners can still save 15% off the InfoSec World main conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2020 and click the register button. Paul and I will now be hosting the Container Security Summit on Saturday, June 20th, before the event. So everything's kind of sliding about 3 months for InfoSec World. Also, Cybersecurity Exchange Day, hosted by Ocean in the Pell Center, was originally scheduled for Wednesday, March 18th last week, has been currently postponed. New date is still pending, and we will keep you updated as soon as we hear more. All right, now we will get to our guest interview. The beautiful thing about podcasts is we can do this all remotely. Jeff Costlow is a security technologist and leader with over 20 years of deep experience securing information and technology assets, as well as years of successful engineering leadership, delivering secure product deployments to thousands of customers. Jeff leads the ExtraHop team towards groundbreaking security and providing privacy services. Jeff, welcome back to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you. It's good to be here yet again. I hope everybody's staying safe out there.
Yeah, you're in your wife's studio, so now you know what it's like to do a remote kind of studio podcast.
Yeah, this is the first time I've used her studio. She's had this for a long time, and this is the first time I've been able to use it. It's nice. She got everything. She's got the microphone. She's got the ring light. Everything works out really well.
That's awesome. Paul gets to be in studio. He's the only one allowed outside of Johnny, so we'll talk about that in the next segment. But let's talk about assets, right? In this segment, we want to talk about how do you prioritize what you do for your assets based on their value? And as we were preparing for this, I think we start with basic asset inventory and discovery. How do we effectively understand what's on our networks and what do we even should be worried about?
Right. This conversation came about a little bit because I often say when I'm speaking publicly, protect your assets commensurate with their value. And that implies two things. First of all, it implies that you know what your assets are. And second of all, it implies that you know what their value is, right? So that way you can do proper risk assessments. But so let's talk a little bit about this. The assets. How can you get a good list of your assets, especially in the climate right now where a lot of people are connecting their VPNs? It seems like your perimeter, it was probably porous before, and it's probably even more porous now. How can you keep track of everything that you've got coming in? What are those assets? Are people using their home machines without endpoint on it? How can you determine what's going on? And it seems like the network is a great way to do that, to be able to look at what's happening on the network as a whole and understand your perimeter and understand what's going through your perimeter, how porous it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine a lot of corporations are going through this transition right now where, I used to have to worry a lot about east-west traffic in my network. Now I've got all these remote employees outside working from home. They could be on a corporate PC. They could be on their home PC. Now north-south traffic is becoming important right now to kind of understand what's going into the environment. So talk about both aspects, kind of the east-west. But right now, I think north-south traffic is probably the bigger concern right now.
How do you define in this case? I think you're defining your east-west traffic as a lot of your north-south traffic, and I think that's what's really interesting and new about this is when people are opening up VPN connections and they're coming into your network. That's a brand new surface area that you didn't have on your network before, and sure, it's coming in through the traditional north-south interface. But it's now a VPN. You don't have any visibility into that. You still have to view the east-west traffic. Like we took a look at our traffic because we happen to have a few network monitoring devices laying around, and we can see that yes, we did have an increase in SSH traffic. Yes, we do have an increase in. It turns out the most interesting increase in SSH traffic we had was SSH over VNC, so that a help desk employee could monitor the cameras that he had in the help desk just to make sure that everything was going well in there and that he could see anything that was going in and out of there. That's an interesting result, right? We could see that SSH traffic and we knew who it was. We knew where it was coming from. So I guarantee you that you're going to see some really interesting new bits and bytes coming across your network traffic. Given the new state of how porous your network is. So east-west has always been super important and well overlooked. Like Paul says, the network traffic is certainly part of this triad or quadrant or however you term it, that everything you need to look at. And I would say that probably you don't have as much visibility into many of those devices when they're over the VPN as you probably think you might have. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. You need to look at the network traffic, right? But there needs to be a balance of how many different segments you create and control versus how much effort you just put into really locking down what's most important. And that's what I got from your title, is protect your assets according to their value, right? And we actually just had this conversation about some applications. We have our own internal application that does a lot of our publishing in business automation. And then we have a wiki component, which we're going to, eventually phase out. But when you look at the risk model for those applications, I'm like, they're basically the same, right? And then the work we've put into hardening those applications, hardening the code, hardening the applications and OSs, and then the internal networking controls that you have within applications. I'm like, do we really need to segment them, right? And I think it's the same thing when we're talking about there's the internet, there's VPN users, and there's local users, right? Those are your three main groups you have to work with. Don't overcomplicate things.
I agree. Complexity is often the enemy of security.
Right.
And so make it simple, understand where it's coming from. I think in reality, the new situation is more people are on your VPN. Yes, it increases some of your surface area. It definitely increases the amount of devices that you have to watch and changes probably the severity of the importance of devices, I guess, over other devices. But there's nothing fundamentally new here. We've had VPNs for a really long time. We may have had a small amount of traffic going through them. Now we might have a little bit more traffic. It's changed, but the problem hasn't fundamentally changed. I think we're both agreeing on this, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just a different way for users to get on your network, and whether they're there locally or coming across a VPN, it's essentially the same, right? But you're still going to monitor the same way you did VPN traffic before. It's just going to be more of it, right? And you're still going to monitor for those very same anomalies. And you may have to tune some of your models and some of the AI within your tools to account for that.
Right. Just for an example, we happen to use GitLab internally. So our GitLab is one of the most important things that we've got. That's one of my most important assets, right? Protect that asset commensurate with its value. I can see that there's a lot of traffic happening. It appears to be pretty much exactly the same amount of traffic before. It does appear to be coming from different hosts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting. Again, a lot of people are SSHing into their workstations, and so we haven't had a lot of change in everything. But there are definitely more people who are VPNing in, and that's changed the porous and changed the nature of it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, guys, I'd say, for an organization like ours, being able to do the exercise of judging the risk of all your assets, it's a chore, right? We have 6,000 customers, we have hundreds of partners, and it's not just the perspective of IT and or security, it's the perspective of the business and what that value is to the business, right? So, just from my experience, you have to know what you have, and then you assess value based on the value to the business. And that means relationship with partners, relationships with other business units, really going deep into that exercise of knowing the true value of what that asset brings to the entire company, right? So I think perspective is huge. And really the only way that we've been successful in my business is being able to partner with our services team and really identifying what's the most important to you as a business unit, partnering with finance, figuring out what those valuable assets are to them, right? Partnering with HR. And it's really figuring out that level of risk is what will cripple the business if it goes down. And then deciding that value from there and then documenting it, right? Our CMDB is gospel here. It's literally the center of the universe, right? And for us, we kind of turned it into a security-oriented CMDB, where we can look at that level of detail in asset, asset, whether it's hardware, software, subscriptions that we have, physical security systems, down to HVAC systems. What is that true risk to the business?
Well, and the interesting thing there is you're well ahead of a lot of other people who don't necessarily have a really good CMDB, and even then, a lot of times there's something that escapes the notice, right? There is your HR system, and you haven't been speaking as much to your HR system as you need, and then you realize that something's really important. That's one of the areas that I think we've done some really interesting work with assigning and coming up with asset values. So we can take a look and we can see the traffic. Here's an example. Our network administrators, right? We call them our extra hop IT team. EHIT is what we call them. They all have laptops that, generally speaking, connect to administrative interfaces on very important assets. I know what those important assets are because everybody talks to those assets. They're kind of core to something, right? Whether it's a web application or something else, they have administrative interfaces to them. I always know when one of our EHIT administrators gets a new laptop because I see the new connections on there. And that helps me a lot to understand that these things are really important. And I can see the different values of the different assets. Or I can see different assets and see how important they are. And what's really interesting is we started to implement a promotion. So when we have an alert goes off and says, hey, it looks like something's going wrong with this machine or something else is happening, we will bump that priority up. And so people will take a look at it and say, oh, this is an administrative device. It's a very important device. These guys are saying it's important. They'll take a look at it. And I know there's stories out there of customers who have figured out that they do have some important assets that they didn't know of. And of course, the classic story is that, underneath the EHIT administrator's desk is something that's super important and nobody knew about it. That happens.
Right. Or it's in the cloud, right? And you can monitor for that as well. I mean, as you were talking, Jeff, I was thinking of our connections into AWS, right? I know that developers and ops people have a certain profile, right? Their connections are probably SSH because we're allowing that, and maybe the database port 3306 because we're allowing that as well. But for the rest of folks, their connections to AWS should be HTTPS only, and that's a great profile to then take a look at your network traffic, correct?
Yeah, that's a great profile. That's the other thing about the modern assets are certainly all over the place. They're in the cloud, they're inside your network, they're all over the place, including IoT devices that you can only get access to over the network, right? You don't have any sort of logs oftentimes from those, and you certainly don't have endpoint on them. So we're back to your same argument of visibility into everything.
So let's think about kind of where we are right now in this interesting time, right? How much do I have to, Jason's really prepared, right? He's got a great CMDB. He knows where his critical assets are. So as he sees a shift in traffic profiles, he can start to tune his systems going, wait, okay, we know we've got a lot of remote users. So, okay, that's probably good behavior, or I'm not worried about it. If you haven't done that step, though, what do we do in the short term to say, how do we start to really understand not only what we have, but its potential criticality or risk profile, and then be able to really get a better handle on monitoring traffic because this is not a normal time frame that we're dealing with now. How effective can we be?
I think we can be quite effective, because I think we do have. I think using the tools that we have available, like I already said, we took a look through our VPN logs, and we have a proxy that we can get through on some resources and VPNs through others. We took a look at those, and we compared before everybody was working from home and after everybody was working from home, and we could definitely see that there was a difference. But we also knew that we were at and I don't have the exact number, 20 or 30% capacity, even during the peak times of the day. So we knew we had enough resources on there. We knew that the availability triad, or the availability leg of the triad, we knew that we had enough resources to make sure that all that stayed up. And that's your business continuity, which is kind of what we haven't said those words around here, but I spend a lot of time fussing and worrying about our business continuity plan and disaster recovery, especially in the last few weeks. So that sort of maintaining the availability of all those assets is just as important as maintaining the confidentiality and the integrity on those assets. Assigning value is certainly important, and yeah, okay, that's where our journey has taken us.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and totally to your point. What we're doing is now we're realizing all of this net new traffic because we are in business continuity mode, right? So it's almost like our organization's creating a new profile, right? A new baseline. We know what our network looks like as well as possible during normal operations, but now we're starting to see all this new traffic coming from new places, and we're starting to try to build that profile of here's what it looks like when we're in business continuity mode, right? When we're kicking off that BCP, and we're actually, 95 to 100% remote workforce, this is what the profile is going to look like.
And I think that feeding that back into what you found, your business continuity plan is now activated to some degree. And so feeding that and figuring out where you need new resources, where you need to maintain more. You also learn a lot about, what are you logging? Do you have a good connection between your VPN users? Can you actually tell where they came in from? And many of those things people are working through right now and looking at the network traffic.
Yeah. Well, we're learning, right? We're in the middle of learning a whole new workforce deployment, right? That's where a lot of organizations are today. So, while we were in pretty good shape as an organization in normal operations, now we're learning what happens during, when you enact BCP.
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are coming to a lot of new conclusions. Like I said, we took a look at ours in the first few days afterwards, and we're monitoring everything just as much as we always do. I'm actually pretty proud of what we've accomplished and where we've gotten to on it. I'm sure there's more things we can do, and we're paying attention to that as well.
Yeah, because I think, Jason, one of the things you'll notice is you've got some blind spots now potentially in what you're used to relying on, because now people are coming in remotely. It could be their own machine. You may not have the same endpoint protection in place. You may not have some of the other things. I imagine you're starting to identify some gaps when you're in a BCP mode, right? That you might want to augment down the road. And I'm curious how the network or the other capabilities you have in place are augmenting some of those blind spots for you.
No. I mean, basically what we're doing is during this learning process, we're treating it like, like our typical risk management. We're logging them, we're assigning risk to it, and then we're building remediation plans on how we get better. I mean, at the end of the day, all of these anomalies that we're finding, we have to treat, right? We have to figure out how we're going to treat that risk, and the only way to do it is really, have a plan in place. So we have, every time we identify it, we add it to a risk matrix, right? And then we're going through a risk mitigation plan like we would if, we had a third-party auditor come in here and discover vulnerabilities, right? We treat it that same way, where we're identifying the risks, we're documenting the risks, and we're creating a plan to remediate afterwards. We have to, right? And it's something that I feel, we have to make sure we're focusing on, because God only knows the next time something like this is going to happen. I hope it doesn't, honestly, right? I hope we're not put in this scenario. But for us, this was a great learning experience. We're going through a great learning experience. We're learning more and more about our people's habits, the traffic going on within our network in a situation like this, when we have so many folks remote, when so many of our partners are remote. Because again, we have a lot of partners that we work with, and we have had traditional, mechanisms of connectivity for them, but now they're remote. They're in the middle of a BCP plan, right? So, we have to figure out that level of complexity as well, dealing with partners who now have to be 100% remote workforce.
Yeah. And Jeff, when we were preparing for talking about the situational awareness aspects of, what's going on, right? And now we have these network shifts that are happening due to a lot of remote workers. And so, how do you really understand that situational awareness and bring that into some of the prioritization aspects of what you can do with an extra hub?
So again, one of the prioritizations that we've done is we've been able to figure out what assets were some of your more important assets. We can bump up some of the risk scores on those. I did speak a little bit about administrative interfaces. So these are all techniques that we use to identify what the really important assets are. We can adjust the risk scores. The important bit is we do that all through just watching the network traffic, right? We can tell what administrative interfaces are. We know what we can take a look at just purely through the network traffic. We can look at encryption. We can tell you, oh, you know what? You don't actually have encryption turned on this set of controls or this set of devices over here, or you've got old certificates. These are kind of all things that we've been doing for a really long time. But I do think that the new normal here, a lot of people really need to pay attention and draw some graphs and figure out where their traffic is going, where it wasn't before, and figure out what assets they've got, or what new assets are super important as opposed to before. Yeah. The other thing I would point out is I'm a big fan of working within some sort of methodology or figuring out how to plan something and not just reacting to the du jour. So we mentioned risk register earlier. This is a great way to do this. At the RSA conference a month ago, it seems like a forever ago now, but not that long ago, I did a talk about risk analysis methodology. And I sort of sat down and I said, well, okay, if I can't have visibility into the endpoint of IoT devices and I don't know what they are, I came up with just a very simple methodology to say, are people using encryption on these devices? Is the data going to a US-based data center or overseas? And, how much data is going across the wire? And evaluate all those things and then come up with just an overall risk score for a certain device, right? Like I looked at some devices I had on my home network. I looked at some devices we had on our network at work and came up with a really simple risk methodology. And I already said some of the things that were there. That sort of methodology and that sort of thinking about how you're going to evaluate the risk is super important in this time. And I would urge people to pay attention and think about their methodology and think about the risk analysis in a new way, given that some things have changed and that they now have more remote devices and other devices that aren't where they might necessarily have expected.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. We're going to see a lot of new patterns emerge over the next couple weeks if we haven't already seen them. And having some ability to gauge the level of risk of some of those new devices and connections will help you hopefully secure your environment in this remote time. Gentlemen, did you have any more questions for Jeff while we have him here on the line?
No, I do not.
Good from my side.
Awesome. Right. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Great talking to you guys today. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff.
And if anybody wants to learn more about ExtraHop, please visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.